So today we're going to draw a lovely snowy tree, and we're going to start with 3 colours, and then we can have a little bit more of a play if we want to. So the 3 colours I've chosen, a white, a green and a blue, and we're going to start with our white. We're going to add some green underneath, and then we're going to pop some blue or violet shadows on. Starting off with the toned paper or a envelope, piece of brown paper. It's easier, I think, to have a play with the whites on a toned background to start with, and then we can work on a white surface after we've had a little bit of a practice. So the first thing I suggest that we do is just have a little think about the sorts of shapes that we're going to be creating with our little trees. So one of the key sort of shapes is going to be almost like a snowman arm. So we come out and then we put sort of 3 prongs at the end. That's going to be our base shape. And then if we think from there, actually maybe we've got more sort of fingers or appendages coming out. Add a few more of those on. And then the next step is to just sort of soften, so lighten our pressure a little bit. So obviously I'm using the white here, and just soften just a little bit, make it a little bit wider like that. The next thing we're going to do is sort of poke some green underneath. This is a dark green that I'm using here. Just poke a little bit of green underneath. Doesn't need to be everywhere. Just a suggestion then of the green sort of showing from the fir tree sort of showing underneath that branch, and then we can add in some shadows on top of there. And I'm not being too particular where the shadows are at the moment, just a little quick demo there of where I think they would be. And then to build the tree up then, what we're doing is we're repeating that sort of process and working quite quickly. So you see I'm not taking my pencil off the paper here. I'm just sort of sketching in a few sort of shapes. This one's got a bit more of a curve to it, and then on the other side I might do something very similar. So it's that sort of 3-pronged end, and then adding on some more sort of chevron shapes as we go up, and then we might have one that comes towards us, so we're doing that same sort of 3-pronged chevron shape, and then snowman hat, and then adding those further chevrons on. And then it's just a case then of layering these on top of each other, softening them off a little bit, because we don't want them to all look like snowman hands, snowman arms. We want them to have a little bit of variety in them, so it doesn't matter too much if they all look different. In fact, we sort of want that. In fact, if some of them sort of turn up and we don't do all of that, we don't even it off, make it sort of symmetrical either side, that works as well. So we add in our white, and then underneath, so this is just a quick demo to show you the general sort of approach. Poking in some green underneath. You'll note that I'm not poking it everywhere. I'm just putting it in a few places, and then coming over the top with a bit of blue shadow. And then what we can do is then refine that, go through those 3 pencils again. What I might want to do is sort of soften off the blue, blend it a little bit, lighter pressure, more careful now, and just sort of soften that, almost spread it out a little bit. If that goes too light, I might swap back to the blue. For my green, I might try and actually define a few little shapes, and that's the sort of approach that we're going to take. So I'd suggest probably having a little bit of a practice with this first of all. It is easier if you do have a reference photo to work from. I certainly did used a free reference photo for the sort of demos that I've been creating here, and it's exactly the same process for on the white paper. So if you don't have the toned paper, I just suggest starting with a cool grey base layer. So you want something that you can see, and I'd sort of draw in where you want the snow to go, poke under your greens, and then start adding in either, this is a teal blue, sort of a violety blue, add in some blue shadows, and the final one, it's sort of refining those. So here I brought back in the polar ice. I started playing around with the shadows a little bit, so I popped in some burnt rose. That's a complementary colour, so I did a little bit of a test for this one. So what I did was I thought, well, I'm working with this sort of sage leaf green here. What would happen if I just used a darker green? So an analogous colour on the colour wheel, so one next to it, this sort of spruce green. That would work well to darken the values off in those extreme shadows. What would happen if I sort of played around with a complementary colour instead? I wasn't overly keen on this scale and the time that this drawing took, probably a couple of minutes each of these, and then this one probably took 5 to 10 minutes, so having a bit more of a play with it. I didn't feel like it needed to mess around with this burnt rose, and actually I probably could have just gone away with a spruce green. So what I did was I went over a lot of that burnt rose with that green to sort of darken it off. And then I just started playing around with these colours a little bit, and you can see I also started to think about where the light might hit it. So I've got a little bit of a ray of sun coming in, just hitting some of the branches on this side, just to have a little bit of a play with it, really. Oops. You can see I did that on this one as well down here. It just gives it a bit of a sort of bit of a glow. This was my first attempt. You see how sort of scribbly it was. It was actually quite challenging to draw on this surface. It's almost got a little bit of a sheen on it, this particular envelope that I was using here. I had to use quite hard pressure on it, and that was just a tree, completely sort of out of my imagination, that one. But then these ones have been the more sort of practice versions. So if I move that to the side, let's have a go at recreating this then on the toned paper. So my approach would be probably to start somewhere up here, and just do that sort of snowman arm. So that sort of three-pronged bit at the top there, coming down here a little bit like this, and then branching off. And you'll see here I've got, what adds to the sort of realism of this is it's not the same size all the way up, so I've not got this sort of classic, if I do a little doodle down here, not that we've got this sort of classic cone shape for the tree. It moves around a little bit, so we've got a taller bit here, got a few sticky out bits here. Generally it sort of follows that shape, but there is a bit of more of a natural variation. So I'm going to come down here, and then we're approaching these bits here. I'll come off to the side and off to the side on this side. I'm using light pressure to start with, and you can see I'm very rarely taking my pencil off the paper. I've got a nice sort of hanging down bit here, and pop in a bit of that white coming down here, a few branches. Doesn't have to replicate a certain tree, and it's a lot more freeing if we just let the pencil sort of go where it wants. And then we've got, again, these sort of 3 branches coming out, or maybe 4. Maybe I'll pop another one in sort of here, coming down there. You see I did a general sort of curve and then I'm coming in and refining that. Practicing on the toned paper allows you to play with lights and darks first and get the feel for the strokes that you're using. Practice that rather than worrying too much about the colour. Because I think one of the problems with this original, or one of the challenges in this original drawing, is that you start off with something very, very pale and you're wondering, do I leave the white? Do I avoid the snowy bits? Do I add them in? So I just suggest going one shade darker than the paper. So if you've got a polychrome or something like that, a cold grey 1 would be fine, or even a cold grey 2, just really gently, just giving you some guiding lines, which is what we've got coming out here. So these guiding lines, just move that down a little bit, that's my reference. And you can see I'm loosely copying some of the shapes on there. It's those shapes that we sort of practiced right at the beginning. Bringing those down and around. Maybe I've got another sort of big branch coming towards us, and then I think these are big branches at the bottom. It's just sort of laying almost in the snow. I did have a little bit of experiment putting some sort of the trunks of these trees on, and in the end they just looked, I couldn't get them to look quite right. So I do prefer it when it goes straight on the snow. I think that's a little bit easier. So it's just my little tree sketch here, and then I've just put a little bit of snow on the bottom there. So that's enough to guide me at the moment. You can see it's really rough, and then the next thing I'm going to do is start poking under a few of those greeny bits. So I don't need the green everywhere, but it is helpful to give us some of that depth. The photo itself that I was working from was all sort of a grey colour, but I think actually using that as inspiration and then deviating away from it by adding in some colour. So you can, what I'm doing now is I'm sort of drawing in the gaps. So I'm drawing in the surface that hasn't been touched by that white pencil, and flicking or poking into some of that white. You can see I went over a little bit there, it doesn't matter. Just refine that shape as I go there. A little bit of colour there. There's a lot of freedom in landscapes and natural elements, because no two trees look the same, and a given tree will change over time as well. So we've got some of our greens in. So starting to look more tree-like, which is great. And then if you're just working with the 3 pencils, I'd suggest going for the blue. So the blues, we're looking for the sort of shadows really. That's going to give us the depth. And then also, as we're creating these sorts of shapes, if I bring in this doodle over here, so we've got our sort of pronged shapes sort of evolving as we're drawing them. None of them need to look exactly the same. And then I might come poke some green shadows around it. You can see I'm doing it really quickly, I'm not being too precise. And then I can sort of put a little bit of blue on top. So that's the sort of approach we're using. This one has got a few more layers on it. So this is the rough sketch, this is a rough approach. Then what I've done is I've come back to that and just slowed down, put in another layer, and I'm sort of moving some of that blue around and then maybe coming back on there. And that would be the time to bring in other pencils if you wanted to. So if you wanted to bring in some more violet-y tones or violet greys, you could pop those on there. So what was I working with? Something like a fossil grey. It's quite nice, and it's quite helpful to sort of poke into into the gaps where the fingers might have been. Okay, so almost like between the snowman's fingers. So if I put my hand around that way, we're poking in and sort of creating that almost 3D sort of shape there. So I'd be poking in here and here and here and here. And I'm just sort of moving that pigment around. I'm not worrying if some of that green drags in, because it's all going to add to the effect. So that's where we're going with it. But the first thing I think really is with the snow is just to think, actually, white isn't that helpful. White is quite a nice one to work on this toned paper as a sort of base layer. But actually, the snow itself is going to reflect the sky. And on a nice bright day, it's going to be a nice blue colour. Or if the sun's sort of setting, we've got long shadows cast on the ground, it's going to have a nice blue hue to it. If you watch any cartoons, I was watching The Grinch with my kids the other day, and you look at how illustrators do it, the snow, and we just want a slightly subtler version of that, I think. It always has a sort of blue or a purple hue to it. In reality, in a lot of photos we take, it's more of a grey, but I think that's not quite so exciting. So I was unconsciously just going to add in a bit of that fossil grey there, but I won't, because it wasn't on the list of pencils I initially started with. So we've got this sort of general shape here now, and then what I'm doing then is just going back over with those sort of snowman hands, over and over. It's a light pressure unless it's not coming onto the paper at all, in which case I'm increasing the pressure ever so slightly. Especially where I've put those blues, I just want to smudge them in a little bit, just soften them so they haven't got that sort of harsh edge to them. And then I can come back with my green, maybe now with a bit harder pressure, and I can just define things a little bit more. Just think about how we want those, what sort of shapes we want. So we want our sort of branches coming towards us like this. We want those branches on their sides. We want them going off in the other direction on the sides as well. So we're just trying to emphasize those a little bit. Add in a bit of a harder pressure there. So that is our quick sketch of our tree. And then it's completely up to you how much time you want to spend adding details and having a play with it. The next option, as I say, would be to bring in another colour. So something like this fossil grey. So the fossil grey is just got a slightly purpley tone to that dull purpley tone there. Or you could add in more of a purpley colour, this teal blue, so it's more of a violet colour. So we could come in with a bit of that. And what I like to do with these colours is just to, as I say, poke and almost between those sort of fingers, soften those off a bit. The blue itself, the one I've chosen, can be quite strong, so we could come back with that and darken. You see how bright it can be on this one over here. And I wouldn't be afraid, as I am now, look, I'm just using this colour, so this is a teal blue, and I'm just using it to move the green around a little bit. I'm not going into the white with it, but I'm just almost softening the shadow bits off. And if we just give everything a little bit of a haze, then it seems more like a sketch and more like a something realistic but a bit more illustrative than we were ever trying for perfect realism. So that's not what we're doing. If we wanted to do that, we'd spend a lot more time on it. But something like this, practice a couple of times. You could do this quite quickly. Make some little gift tags or little cards or something. And then, yeah, just circling through. I'm adding a little bit harder pressure with that blue. Maybe you've got stronger shadows down here. And it's a really, really nice thing to sort of to play around with. And it certainly does looks nice at a distance. So this is the first sort of exercise, playing around with these sort of snowman arms, and then play around with some of these colours, and then start to soften it off a little bit, see how your pencils are playing together. And then for the white version, same thing, start with the grey. Instead of the white, you just start with the grey, but then it's the same approach again. We're adding on the greens, we're refining, adding some of the shadows in. It still looks really, really sketchy at this point. It's only when we start smudging things, and so what I did with this is I put the blue in and I came on over with the white, just softened everything off just a little bit. And then when you practice that, you can practice lots of different sizes. So I hope you enjoy this little challenge, Christmas challenge, and have a lovely Christmas if you're watching this in the run-up to Christmas.